But thank you all for being here. This is the last in our series of budget presentations, and this really wraps up the fiscal year 16 budget preparation process. And before I go any further, I want to thank several people. Jeff Hecker, Ryan Lowe, Claire Strickland, Sharon, who always makes the slides and responds in 30 seconds. She can redo a whole PowerPoint presentation. And everybody in their offices. Done.
Thanks for coming.
Bye. I haven't touched it at all. But anyway, seriously, we are hopefully going to go through this. But I really want to thank them. They've been great partners over this year. I could not ask for better colleagues. So for those of you who have been following along with us, you'll see really, I'd say, finality to the elements that we started rolling out 8 or 9 months ago. And just for a refresher, the original structural gap we projected to be $7 million. We then increased it to $8.5 million when the state appropriation did increase, but it didn't increase to the extent that we had, I'll be honest, that we had initially asked for, hoped for. So that caused the gap to go up by $1.5 million. $3 million of our $8.5 million was left over from fiscal year 15 because to settle the fiscal year 15 budget, there was $3 million of one-time money put into it. Well, a one-time fix just does that. It fixed it one time, and we did have to address that in our base budget. So that's another $3 million in our $8.5 million. The other thing, and I think we talked about this essentially repeatedly, was that the timeline for the budget preparation for fiscal year 16 was considerably more accelerated than anything we had done before. And I've been here for years, and I've watched the budget process change. We've changed the timeline over time, but this was the fastest and most accelerated ever. It did provide greater alignment with the legislative budget process. It certainly allowed more time for the Board of Trustees to be engaged and I'd say become informed about the budget that they truly are ultimately responsible for. And it allowed us to be engaged in dialogue and discussion around campus sooner than we had before. And all of those are valuable, and perhaps the last point is really the most valuable. Now, just to tidy up loose ends, the fiscal year 15 budget had been prepared with a request for $900,000 of system resources. That money was never transferred into the University of Maine because we brought the fiscal year 15 budget into alignment without it. So some of the documents over the years will show that we were being held to a $900,000 ask from the system, and it does appear in some of the documents, but we never got it, and it's been eliminated. We are not being, in a sense, charged for that. Let me move on to we'll see if this works and stays there. And let me just go through some of the key principles that we were trying to, we adopted and we were trying to hold to in this process. We did. What is going on? I don't know. I pressed it one time. Okay, I'll just talk. Trust me. We tried to emphasize transparency in terms of the principles and the processes we covered and we were utilizing. And if you look back over the PowerPoints that were posted at the various presentations, you'll see the same elements and some of the same slides reoccur. We did want feedback. We wanted input throughout the multi-month process of developing the FY16 budget. We appreciated folks taking time to provide it. We had several campus-wide presentations, one in October, one in December. We met with the Faculty Senate, did a presentation there. There was a presentation to student government. I appreciate everybody attending one or more of those. I appreciate people watching it on YouTube. We appreciate everybody submitting feedback, and we appreciated people just stopping us and talking to us on campus. And that was really one of the benefits of being out early, and I'd say early and often. It's kind of like voting in Chicago, frankly. But because we were talking about it more publicly earlier in the year, I think people started thinking about it and people were engaged in more discussion, and that's helpful. We presented the budget plan to Vice Chancellor Weick and Norm Fournier, who is the chair of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee of the board. We did that in February. And then we did a more formal presentation to the full committee, the full Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee in March. In all of our presentations, we presented a balanced budget for fiscal year 16, requiring no usage of campus reserves or system reserves. It was important, looking at the second principle up there, it was important that we wanted to protect growth and productivity on campus and not really take or use an across-the-board mentality in approaching the problem. We tried to look across budget units. We encouraged people to think and look for opportunities to collaborate across campus. In some ways, we wanted people to sort of think differently. We had gift processing, for example, moved into the foundation. Athletics and auxiliaries have partnered up. And there are other examples, and that was really helpful. And the more that happens, the more it sort of stimulates other people to think of ways to be creative, and that's great. It's not just a budget reduction exercise. We did stress it was obviously essential that we develop a balanced budget that addressed the structural gap. But we needed to continue making investments in instruction, enrollment growth, financial aid, and strategic, the signature and emerging academic and research areas. We tried to be focused on being as strategic as possible in terms of identifying targets that minimize the impact on academic affairs and the core student areas. So that's academic affairs, research, and student affairs. Approximately 80% of our E&G budget is occupied by those three areas in toto, taken together. The overall net cut to the E&G budget from those areas is 30%. So that was as good as we could do, and it took all of us working together. I mean, everybody on this campus working together to be able to do that. And we recognized, obviously, the last budget bullet, we recognized that everyone on campus was worried about possible impacts on employment, both for themselves and their longtime friends and colleagues. The FY16 budget does not include any program closures. There are no faculty retrenchments. The goal was to minimize the impact on employees by using vacant positions as much as possible to reduce the need for layoffs. So the overarching goal was to minimize as best as possible and come right back to it, the core student-focused areas, and that ends up being academic affairs, research, and student affairs. And with that, I'm going to, good luck with the slides, Ryan, but I'll turn it over to you.
So, like Sue, I'd also like to thank folks for, the president and the provost for their strong leadership, the cabinet, Claire and her team, and really everyone on the campus. I mean, I've had a chance to put together budgets at a much smaller campus, had a chance to do it much larger budgets at the state level, and this is as involved as a community has been in any of those. And I see that consistently when whenever the system is doing any surveys, you can assume 90% of the responses are going to come from this campus. Great feedback, and again, when you're going through, a long process like this, very, very helpful information, very helpful feedback. So again, really appreciate that. And also wanted to just acknowledge the great work from my perspective that that Janet had done over a number of years and that Judy did in the last year. Really made it easy for me. I came on board in September just as we were starting this process, and very easy to hit the ground running thanks to all of that great work that was done in advance. So like the last slide that the president talked about, this is this timeline we've had in the presentation since we started our first since we had our first campus community conversation last October. And a great visual of the system timeline on the top, the campus timeline on the bottom. I think this is absolutely something that you'll see us continue to use. I think you'll see other campuses adopt as well. And again, don't really need to go through all the boxes, but again, you can see where we are now. Just recently had the Board of Trustees approve that final budget. As we look forward, and we'll talk a little bit at the end of the presentation about the FY17 budget development and even what we can expect in this one university budget model all the way out into fiscal year 18. I think you'll see, a similar timeline, but probably what's going to happen is that this is going to morph into a 12-month timeline, year-round. You're going to see things like the multi-year financial analysis, that the 5-year look at each of the campus budgets. I think you'll see that move up to July. You're going to see some of the assumptions that we use to build our budget. We're going to see those a little bit earlier in the year as we increase the collaboration with the other campuses and the trustees. It just means we need to start the process a little bit sooner. And as the president said, that's that can be a positive as well. I think one more piece though. Regardless, I think of the changes that we see at the system, regardless of how the new budget process impacts us, I think in my experience, I think we're definitely committed to this same public process from the front end all the way until the back end. Again, regardless of how this new budget process and the unified budget eventually work. So, obviously the budget process, the university budget process, very dependent on the state budget cycle. They're having those conversations right now. A lot of late evenings going on in Augusta. Again, when we started this process back in October, we were submitting our request to the legislature at the time. Very fortunate to receive the funding that we did, nearly $20 million in new resources recommended by the governor. Strong bipartisan legislative support for that. So again, huge thanks to the Education Committee. Going down into the spring, we went through the budget hearings, went through work sessions, talked about advocacy. I think in the past we talked a lot about getting folks into Augusta, talking to legislators, and several folks did that. Very helpful conversations. The other piece that was very helpful were the folks that had legislators, that reached out to legislators and brought them to campus. In some ways, I felt like that's even more effective when you get the visuals. And I know we had a lot of legislators here this year. We had the governor here on a couple of occasions, and again, tremendously helpful. Just a quick update of where we are now. The legislature is going through the final phases of developing the state budget. I think we're expecting the Appropriations Committee to wrap up their work, ideally, by the end of this week, potentially Friday, early into Saturday morning. Again, so far, those conversations have gone very well. Still looking at the same amount of resources that we had when the governor presented them back in January. That's a pretty big accomplishment considering all of the difficult decisions that are going on. Very few places where there is new money being invested. So one, to even get the recommendation on the front end for new resources, but to hold them through the budget process despite all of the challenges, is really has been fabulous so far. And so I don't want to jinx it and talk about it anymore. We're also next week, ideally if the budget gets out of committee next week, we're looking at bond conversations starting next Friday with a public hearing on several bond bills that will impact the system. We're very hopeful, again, that we can get a sizable piece of that bond package. Look to continue making investments across the campuses. So this is the final version of the pie chart that we've had since we started this process. When we started back in October, I think we were showing the FY15 budget. January, we moved over to a kind of a preliminary. This is what we're looking at, and this is the final allocation of the E&G budget. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on the detail. I think if, looking ahead, looking at the things that we might want to change, because I think there are some positives in here. We've talked about it before. We've talked about, roughly 64% of our budget invested in compensation and our people. I think that's great. Scholarships and grants, a huge chunk. So some really positive things in here. There are things that we'd like to see shifted. It's these two right here. It's a bigger reliance, ideally on state appropriation. Again, we're looking, our state appropriation, though it's about 32% of our budget, it's significantly down from what it was in 2008, both as a system and at this campus. So we'd like to continue to see the state appropriation increase, and then not rely as heavily on the tuition and fees side of it. One more piece I think I did want to mention here was, just wanted to acknowledge the scholarships and grants piece, $40 million. We did have $3 million in new resources that we committed, as the president was talking about. We still want to invest. I just want to acknowledge that because, as I was looking at the system presentation, looking at the amount of financial aid, scholarships, grants that, what percentage of our budget that is versus some of the other campuses. Huge investment, huge priority at this campus. Would have been very easy, given the budget challenges that we had, to flat fund that line. If we would have flat funded that line, there's not one person that would have raised an eyebrow. It would have been completely appropriate, would have been in line with what some of the other campuses did. But we had that as a commitment. It made sense. And so we made strategic decisions in other areas so that we could fund that, and that's just great work on the part of this campus. I'll turn it over to the provost.
Thanks, Ryan. So my piece is to talk a little bit about enrollment. So from the prior pie chart, you can see that we are increasingly relied on tuition and fees for our budget. You see, I think it was 57%. So the coin of the realm, as Claire Strickland likes to say, is credit hours. And this is our history of a credit hour production, if you will. These are fall census data going back to 2009. And so you can see, we were on a decline for a few years. We managed to bend the curve, as they say, back in the positive direction starting in 2013. So the last 2 years, we've taken in large classes. The class that started fall 2013 was the largest entering class in the history of UMaine. This last fall was the third largest. So we've been successful in that, in turning the corner. And that is against the demographics of the state. Despite the fact that the demographics are going down, we're having some success in enrollment and bringing in a larger percentage, or a larger number of students, and that obviously is very important with respect to our bottom line. This is another take on that. So whereas the numbers you saw on the last slide were fall census data, these are data in credit hours for the full year. And what we have is what we budgeted, how we built the budget, and what we actually got in student credit hours. And so you can see the two lines are close. So we do a pretty good job of predicting the number of credit hours, but we build our budget based upon that. So I'll draw your attention to a couple of things. This year, we projected 279,000, almost 280,000 credit hours, and actually didn't get quite as many as we thought we would. Even though we had a very healthy size incoming class, we had a very ambitious target for that in building our budget. Fortunately, the mix of in-state and out-of-state helped with that, and I'll show you that in another slide. But so what we've done for this fall is we have we built our budget based on this many credit hours, which you'll notice is slightly larger than the actual for this year, but less than we had budgeted the year before. So I think we have actually a pretty reasonable, conservative target. It's early going in the recruitment cycle, but our numbers look really quite good. In terms of overall confirmation of students for next fall, we're, I think, down 2% over where we were last year. And that, again, I'll show you, is in a mix of in-state and out-of-state. But we're very close to where we were. We'll be putting on a very strong initiative this summer to as they say in the admissions game, fight and melt, so keep as many of those students who are confirmed and get them here. But that's where our budget is built. Next thing I want to show you is this breakdown of in-state and out-of-state. And I think this really tells the story of how the University of Maine is evolving. And again, for the focus of this budget presentation, the importance for our budget. And you can see, if you follow the blue line, we're decreasing our credit hours produced by in-state students. It's a challenging. If you look at the demographics for the state of Maine, that's the biggest challenge that the entire system faces. We're balancing, we're succeeding in recruiting out-of-state students, and we're building our budget around that. So you can see the red line is where we projected and built the budget for out-of-state enrollment, and we've actually surpassed that in each year, which has been very good for us. So thinking back to the prior slide where we built a budget on roughly 280,000 credit hours and we only produced 275, we were okay budget-wise because of the balance there. We had more out-of-state students than in-state. So in terms of our financial model and plan, the focus on out-of-state students is very important. This entering class we're looking at, the one we took in this year had 37% out-of-state. The one we look at, again, based on preliminary numbers, was roughly the same percentage out-of-state for next fall. If you look at the overall enrollment for the University of Maine, you go back through the years, we were always right around 15 to 18% out-of-state. We're now at 26, close to 27. We think that will move up. I think we can build a budget model somewhere around 30 to 35% overall out-of-state would be a healthy model for the state and for us, and so that's what we're working toward. Yes, oh, this is residency, so I'll let Ryan take this.
So I'll come back up for a couple slides here. Residence hall occupancy is a statistic that the trustees follow closely. Had a lot of conversations on it. So we wanted to highlight the great work that's being done here. Again, we're actually have 100 new beds, 99 new beds coming on. So we've actually increased capacity. Again, you can see we've been roughly between 97 and 100% for the last several years. Really, that's a reflection of the great work that that Dan Stirrup and his crew do, that Robert Dana and his team. Because I can assure you this is not the trend system-wide. What we're seeing at other places is closing down residence halls, taking rooms offline. I know when looking at some of the bond proposals that are coming forward, we have some campuses that are looking for bond funds to renovate those, to try to get people back in. So again, another reflection of the great work that's being done here. And from a budget perspective, it's really, it's just great planning. When I have conversations with Dan, it's not, here's what we're doing next year. It's here's what we're doing 5 years from now, and here's what we're doing for 10 years from now. And here's how we're reinvesting back into our facilities to attract more students. It's not, what we see, I think, in some other places is, you have a good year, you take those resources, you help fill the budget hole, you come back next year and you start all over again. That's not the pattern that we've done, and it shows in the success that we've had on this campus. So again, going back to the budget principles that the president outlined on the first slide, the last bullet, talking about doing what we could to minimize the impact on all of our employees, clearly one of our most valuable assets. Again, would just note, while any position action is going to be very difficult, we were able to, of the 36, of the FTE reduction of 36, 32 of those were vacant positions, they were retirements, they were resignations. So again, not layoffs, not retrenchments. So that ended up, again, being about 90% of them. I think we ended up with 4 layoffs. So again, those are very difficult, but we were able to minimize those as best we could as we went through the budget process.
So if you go back just once. Over to the top where it says investments, and just a little bit about what that refers to. For those of you who were here Tuesday, when we talked about our strategic investment in the signature and emerging areas, that's what that reflects. President Hunter and the leadership team, the cabinet, agreed that we had made a commitment to move forward strategically at the University of Maine. We have a strategic plan. Part of that plan called for an investment in our signature programs. So we identified areas. We identified 7 faculty lines that would serve to support the signature areas of excellence and the emerging areas of distinction, and that also were key need areas in terms of enrollment growth in different areas on campus. So we made that decision at the beginning of the year to approve those hires, recognizing full well that they would contribute to our budget challenge, but we thought that that was important. So those positions represent key strategic investments in faculty lines that we made, and then of course you can see that the net change was a loss of 11 faculty lines for the year. Go ahead. I just wanted to show you though the hiring that we're doing, just so you don't leave with the any wrong impressions. We're doing a lot more hiring than the 7. We have had a lot of retirements this year. And this is just a quick shot. I'm not going to talk through these, but this is a quick shot of the positions that were approved for searching for this year. Many of them have been filled. Some of them are still we're still in the search process. But you'll see there's been healthy reinvestment, I would say, in faculty lines around the campus. And next fall we'll have a healthy number. I'm not sure the next one of new faculty around the campus. And I won't say the total end because I'm not sure how many of those will actually be filled, but it'll be a healthy number. You show one more slide. That's the last group. So even though, as Ryan said, we have had to have FTE reductions, we tried to do that strategically and also thinking and being mindful of protecting our employees, taking most of those through retirements and other attrition. We've done some investment in faculty lines, and we are replacing a large number of the faculty retirements that we have. But I think you're up next.
So just a couple more quick slides before I turn it back over to the president. Again, this is another slide that we have consistently used. I think it's a great visual. I think we all understand the quality of education. I think this shows the value. I've used this slide a number of times in a lot of legislative conversations. It's easy when when you sit in some of those legislative conversations, you walk away thinking we're the most expensive university in the country, that we have 10% tuition increases year over year over year. So again, being able to go back and talk about having the lowest combined, if you include room and board, both in-state and out-of-state, of all of the 5 New England land grants, is very, very impressive, and again, a reflection of the great work. Next one. And then, to kind of wrap up FY16, what's the impact on students? So again, we're in our fourth year of a tuition freeze. So tuition and fees, a modest room and board increase, a modest out-of-state tuition increase, and again, overall, relatively small impacts, less than 2% across the board for all of our students. Again, as we were preparing, can you go back just one, Sharon? As we were preparing this chart and looking around at the data for the other New England schools, we were consistently seeing 3 and 4% tuition increases, 6% I think at UConn, bigger room and board increases on top of that. So again, coming in under 2% across the board, I think again is very positive.
But yeah, what is next? What does one university really mean? And just for a bit of foreshadowing, if you could look back 20 years, there were people in the country, leaders in higher education, that were starting to sound the alarm and saying, you know, we are going to run into major problems, and they were just looking ahead at the issues that we're all very well acquainted with now. Rising costs, ballooning student debt, really the unbundling of educational offerings. And the other piece I'll put on that, especially for public institutions, has been the change in state appropriation and the degree to which states are supporting their higher education system. And, you know, Maine is not different. I'll mention why Maine is a little bit more challenged, but Maine is not different from the rest of the country. There are many states that cover, that their state appropriation is even a far smaller percentage than it is here. But if you look back at 1999, in the University of Maine system, the state appropriation covered about 2/3 of our E&G budget. And tuition and fees was about 1/3, and we have just flipped that, we've reversed that. And then, you know, you couple that with the trustees' desire to hold prices down for in-state students. We admire them, we understand why they're doing that, we're seeing the rise in student debt, but that, of course, creates pressures for us to deal with on campus. So, the additional challenges in Maine really relate to both demography and geography. Demography in that there is a very substantial, and you all know this, a very substantial decline in the number of high school graduates. And we're also an aging state. We are the state with the highest median age population. And we're also geographically challenged. All the things that we love about Maine and the mystique of Maine, it means, though, that we are very rural, far-flung. We have a dispersed aging population and this very large state. A couple months ago, I added up the area of every New England state, and then I compared it to Maine. And the rest of New England fits inside Maine, other than like about 900 square miles. It's staggering. I mean, I knew Maine was big, but I didn't realize it was quite that big in comparison to the rest of New England. That creates challenges. I know the Chancellor has talked about the changes to come as the most complex, I think he refers to it as an evolutionary process that's ever been attempted by the University of Maine system, and I fully agree. And let me be absolutely blunt. It is going to be breathtakingly challenging. But I think it's also very clear, at least from my perspective, that the University of Maine system is not financially viable in its present form. And if we don't somehow work our way through substantial change, we will not have a higher education, a public higher education system in the state that really is going to serve the needs of the state if we looked ahead 25, 30 years. The goal, and I'm going to be careful here because I'm going to try to say what I think is absolutely correct and not say what could be misleading. I'll put it that way. I think the goal will be, we will ultimately form a single university entity and a single administrative entity, but we will clearly have multiple mission differentiated locations. And that will involve us with the 6 other institutions within our system. Some of it will clearly take time. This is not going to be a stroke of the pen thing and it's all done. Some of the portfolios are already moving toward greater alignment, centralization. I know that everybody is wrestling with IT. I know everybody's wrestling with procurement. I know this. I fouled up procurement myself, but we won't go there. Ryan is going to speak about some of the other structural changes, but before I give it back to him, I just want to really think a little bit about the role of the University of Maine. We are the state's only research university, and I said this at the Board of Trustees meeting a few weeks ago. There are a number of states that have multiple research universities, and you can look around the country, obviously California, but if you look at Michigan, you look at Pennsylvania, you look at Massachusetts, you look at Virginia, they have multiple universities that are true research universities. The state of Maine has one. We are the hub for graduate education and research for this entire state. And it is essential that we maintain our strength and enhance ourselves. If nothing else, we have to maintain where we are, but we really have to enhance it. If by any way we are diminished in that regard, it will be a tragedy. Because once lost, it will be impossible, or very difficult, if not impossible, to regain that stature. So I will harp on the need for a research university in the state over and over and over again until the trustees frankly get really tired of hearing me say it. The Board of Trustees at the May 18th, I guess it was May 18th, yeah, the May 18th meeting approved a unified finance and administrative structure. And additionally, and this last thing, and if you go to the board materials, look at tab 21, because this is where this comes from. They charged the chancellor, the vice chancellor, that's Vice Chancellor Weick, and the 7 presidents to present an implementation and communication plan for the initiatives required to achieve the strategic outcomes, and that's especially strategic outcomes 1 through 4, in support of the One University framework, and that's supposed to happen by the September Board of Trustee meeting. Now, I can tell you that over the summer, the presidents are having 3-day retreats every month. We're starting on a Tuesday midday, working the rest of Tuesday, all of Wednesday, and going through lunch on Thursday, so I guess 2 days, essentially. And we're going to just keep meeting and trying to find and craft a plan going forward that will address the needs. And the provost and I talk about this often. It is important that we talk about access and affordability and program availability and thinking of new ways to offer programs around the state and figuring out ways to offer programs in parts of the state that maybe people would actually engage in the programs if they were offered there. But it's also essential that we don't lose sight of the fact that we have a very serious fiscal problem. And so in spite of all of the good reasons for doing much of this, we also have to make it affordable, and we have to close a very large structural gap, which Ryan can talk on at great length if he wanted to, but he probably won't today. So anyway, I want to thank all of you. It's the partnership of the 2,300 people that work on this campus that make this place work, and make this place work for the people of Maine. So thank you.
Most of these, as the president mentioned, these are plans that were approved in May by the board after some campus feedback. We are, again, as you can see here, HR and finance were the two that came up at the May meeting. I'll talk just a little bit about those. I think the key piece here is that now we're in the implementation stage, so it's very easy to look at the org charts, and again, I'll show them in just a second, and have all kinds of questions. And I can assure you, as someone who has all of those questions, there's not a ton of answers out there. I think the direction that we're moving in is being decided. What we need to do, as a system and certainly as a campus, is engage with the system leadership, make sure that they understand the role that the University of Maine plays both within the system and within the state, and make sure that that's reflected in these org charts when we turn them into reality. So on the finance side, again, I'm not going to go through all the pieces. I'll just focus way over on the right. The biggest change on the finance side is really there is the creation of a Chief Facilities and General Services Officer system-wide. That position largely exists today with a different title. So again, not a lot. I won't spend a lot of time talking about that. We do change some of the reporting lines underneath that. Again, it's going to have an impact on our facilities folks, on environmental health and safety. In some areas, again, we're still working through all of those details. The new position in this new org chart is a system-wide Chief Financial Officer. So the thinking is that the 7 current CFOs would become campus Chief Business Officers. You can see in the lower right would have a dotted line relationship up to the campus president, but would report directly to this new Chief Financial Officer. The idea, I think the idea is sound in that, what we need, my observation in, doing this at a small campus and now at a big campus, is that we need to have better coordination across the system in budget development. Doesn't mean we need someone to come in here and tell us how to balance our budget, but again, the way it works now is the 7 campuses go off and develop their budgets largely based on their own assumptions. There are, there are system-wide benefit rates and things like that that are calculated. But generally after that, we go off on our own. We develop our own process. I'm not aware of any other campuses that had maybe more than one, if any, forums, any conversations, any public dialogues. That is all done independent. We get to the end of the process and we stack all 7 budgets on top of each other and we call it a unified budget. We use different assumptions. It's no wonder that we end up with some of the shortfalls that we end up with at the end of the year. There's just not some of the resources at some of the campuses to dig in and to test the assumptions that they're using. And so I do think a little bit more coordination across the 7 campuses when we develop our budgets, when we implement them, is a good thing. What we'll figure out as we move along is how that relationship works between this new chief financial officer position and the chief business officer, both on this campus as well as the other campuses. Again, not a ton of details have been figured out in this. We had a conference call, actually, our Polycom this morning, to talk about some of this. We're going to, as the president was talking about, the presidents getting together, expect a lot of time this summer. Again, putting the details behind this to make sure that it actually works. The other piece that came up on Sunday, 2 Sundays ago, skip one more, was a change in the HR plan. That was originally approved, if I remember right, in September of last year in Fort Kent. The board did make a change, approved a change that now has the campus, essentially all of HR, including the campus HR leader, with a direct reporting lines to this chief human resources officer. And again, dotted line back to the president, similar to what we saw in the finance model. So again, we're anxiously awaiting those details. We will be actively participating, making sure that that this campus is represented well in whatever these new structures end up being. So again, as we move forward, we as we always do, and as you offer, whether we whether we have a public forum for it or not, really appreciate all of the feedback as we move through. I mean, I know folks have not been shy about sharing concerns that they have in procurement within IT. I think again, as we move forward with these new structures, there will certainly be some growing pains, and so getting feedback from the campus will be very helpful. As we were at the board meeting last weekend and talking about the feedback that the board received on the finance plan and the HR change, again, I think roughly 80% of the comments that came in from the campuses came from this campus. So again, that feedback is very helpful. It's helpful to us. It's helpful to the system. Couple of last points we wanted to briefly touch on before we take any questions. I want to talk a little bit about what they're referring to as a new unified budget, and then a little bit about where we think the carry forward policy is going to go. I know that's been on a lot of people's minds because I have all the emails to back that up. The unified budget, so again, the system is looking to move from the process that I talked about before, which is go develop your budgets independently and we'll see you in January, to one that's much more collaborative on the front end, and as we move all the way through that. And so it's not just collaboration though. What they're also looking to do and what they've approved is a truly, fully, as it's referred to on the right, a mature unified budget. And so what that is, and there are a handful of systems that do that, this is all tuition revenue, everything coming in centrally, and then setting up a process to allocate that back out to the campus. So it's no longer, each campus has its own set of revenue that flows in. The idea is that by the time we get to FY16, that this again is truly a unified E&G budget. And so what we anticipate, originally what the trustees were looking to do was to implement that for fiscal year 17. Fortunately, we were able to get them to understand that, the FY17 budget, despite this is our close of FY16, we're starting those conversations right off the bat. So the idea that we could, that we could figure out how all of the tuition, what tuition revenue, what other campus revenue would flow in centrally, what's the process you would use to allocate that back out, how do you set up a process that ensures that, a campus like Machias, is going to have an opportunity to compete for funds. And same thing on this side. How do you ensure that the University of Maine is going to get a fair shake and not just, you already have too much money, so we'll let you set out this round. So that's a lot of work. And so, I think it's at least a 12-month process. I think that's being generous. So what we'd anticipate for 2017 is, a lot more coordination, but revenue would continue to stay where it does now. Tuition revenue would flow in like it does now to each of the campuses. But again, probably just more coordination for FY17. By the time we get to FY18, again, that's the plan: is that a fully integrated, fully mature, unified budget with a single revenue source. That will be a lot of work. That will require, in looking at what some of the other systems that have truly unified budgets, it's a complex process, and it takes a lot of work. So again, we'll see how that develops, but that's what we're looking at on the budget side, and then I'll touch on the carry forward if you can. So carry forward again. This is another one where it's a work in progress. We're working with the system office to understand, how do we comply with board policy. So again, this policy was actually approved by the board in November. That's not going to result in all of our jobs just turning into pushing paper to the system office and getting signatures and bringing that back. So haven't got all the details yet, but it seems like at least where we're headed is that almost like the budget piece. I think we're probably going to do this in phases, but for next year, rather than year-end balances simply going back in October, what we'll have to do now is request uses for their carry forward. So we're working on a process, hopefully not entirely paper-based, where if you're a budget unit and you need, you've got $50,000 in carry forward that you need to use to purchase a piece of equipment, that rather than just going out and buying that equipment, you'll have to submit some kind of paperwork, again, hopefully not literally paper, but some kind of paper that will request the use of those funds. We'll try to automate it as best as possible. It'll go to the system, we'll get approval, and then it will come back. So again, you can think about all the transactions that you do with carry forward. Imagine doing a piece of paper every time you did that. So again, we're trying to get some flexibility with the system office. We haven't worked out all the details. I almost didn't want to include the slide, but there are so many rumors out there that that carry forward is going to be centralized. It's all going to go to the system office. It's going to be in a big bucket. We're going to be sending resources to Machias and Fort Kent. None of that is in the plans for FY16 anyway. For FY16 anyway. Nor will we be advocating for that in the out years. I can only guarantee where we are for next year. But again, there's no plan to centralize that. I did want to touch on that. And again, we're working with the system to try to make sure they understand just the scale and scope of this campus is just so different. And again, in a lot of the other campuses, I think 5 of the 6 other campuses already centralized reserves anyway. So complying with this policy was not difficult for them at all. They already have this in place. It's a big change here. So again, we'll work on the details. We'll keep updating folks. I know it's an important issue, but at least wanted to touch on it briefly. Do I do any kind of wrap up?
actually concludes our formal presentation. We're happy to take questions. So we could turn the lights on. And then happy to, is this thing on? Yeah, I guess it is. Happy to take questions, so go ahead, please. And maybe you need the microphone so everybody.
I don't have a lot of information, but just a general saying of you're as strong as the weakest link. How is UMaine going to keep its strength when there are weak links in this one university plan?
We're going to keep our strength by doing the very things that we do now and do them very well. I mean, the fact that we have multiple campuses in our university system, we all know that. And they're not all alike. We do not have a homogeneous university system. And in fact, other university systems are not homogeneous either. Tonight we're actually, the Board of Visitors is coming in, and we're having a dinner with the Board of Visitors and me and the Chancellor and the Chair and the Vice Chair of the Board. And the rest of the cabinet is not there because the Board of Visitors, to be honest, they want to be a lot more candid and I think direct and very professional, but they want to have that ability to speak a little more bluntly perhaps than they would if there were more people in the room. But if you look at other university systems, any of them you look at, there's a flagship campus. If it has a land grant in the system, not all systems have a land grant. If there's a land grant, it's the flagship campus, it's the research campus. The other campuses are not the same, and those systems embrace the idea of differentiation. They understand that there's different roles for different campuses, and frankly, they tout and they brag about their land grant research university because that's sort of their crown jewel. That's what has to happen, and frankly, it's a bit of an uphill struggle, but the only way we'll get there is by trying.
I do think some of the budget work will help as well. If we can, the way that process works now is there are campuses that have wildly crazy assumptions built into their budget. They don't balance that budget, and then the system contributes, anywhere from $900,000 to $2.5 million to help, get their budget back into balance. And then that cycle starts the next year. They start off, they can't balance because, again, they built this unrealistic budget. So I think the budget planning process on the front end will help alleviate, maybe some of the pain that we feel on the back end when we go back to, and I like to use the word bailout, but it seems to be first one that comes to mind.
I mean, I think one of the things we'll do, in many ways, as the discussions unfold, is to really try to make the point that, when we project enrollment, we actually, Claire and Ryan project enrollment, we work with Ted's office, there's analysis. We come at it from a couple different directions to try to figure out where should we project our enrollment, in-state and out-of-state, how many international students, how many transfers. It's, there's some effort being put, and I think we should, diplomatically, and I'll try to be polite, but we have to have everyone else taking that approach as well. There has to be real analysis before you project that your enrollment's going to go up 15%. Like, why?
I have a question on the one university. It seems to me that if the campuses continue to have their own development offices and those offices succeed, that you run the risk of losing your E&G. So my question is, will the one university have one development office?
Well, my answer is no, but that's my answer. I mean, there's been no discussion of actually centralizing advancement. I mean, the Chancellor and I have talked about that. He's very pleased with the advancement efforts on this campus, and truly, he does understand that people donate to an institution. They donate to the place they went to school. They donate to where their kids went to school, whatever. The worry, and I'll admit this question came to me yesterday, and it's something that will come up this evening, is if this campus is doing a great job in fundraising, somebody gives us $5 million in scholarships, does that allow the system to say, well, then we'll take the E&G money away because you can backfill with that. So the idea is that private funding, private donations are to bolster the activities of the campus, to enhance the activities of the campus. not to substitute for the state or for tuition and allow that money to be withdrawn and taken elsewhere. So there's never been a discussion that it would, but we're going to, certainly it will be a piece of discussion.
The
that'll have
same
to come
kind
up.
of issue would involve, I mean, Carol and David and Jake are working hard to increase the indirect recovery.
Yep.
And that comes in as essentially unrestricted. And it seems to me that the same question arises.
Yeah, and I do know from looking at other systems that have the unified budget, there are systems that segregate that. There are systems that segregate out any development funds, that they have formulas based on, where students are taking classes and credit hours. And there are certain revenue streams that are centralized, but there are others, like the ones you mentioned, that are not. And that's certainly what we'll advocate.
Jim?
Yeah, I know it's really early in the process, but I'm just wondering, for
I think you need this so that they can.
okay. All right. Yeah, I'm Jim Warhol. I'm the chair of the political science department here on this campus. And the question for President Hunter and Provost Hecker, I mean, I know we're very early into this process, but one university, could you just tell us about what your preliminary ideas are? I mean, what is this going to mean programmatically? Is there going to be like one program in biology or political science or history for the whole system? Maybe from a budgetary perspective. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an accountant. Maybe one university might work, but the way that things are structured right now, just programmatically, it just sounds like it's going to create a lot more problems than it would resolve. So if you could, just maybe give us an idea of what your preliminary ideas on that are.
It's multi-billion-dollar enterprise, 39 National Academy of Science members, on and on and on in terms of the research portfolio. That has a fabulous reputation. It's one of the top universities in the country. It's not diluted by the fact that it has 20 Commonwealth campuses. They are separate. They're all part of the same enterprise. But there's tuition differentiation, there's admissions differentiation, there's certainly mission differentiation. There are programs at many of the Commonwealth campuses that are absolute feeders so that students spend 2 years at a Commonwealth campus and feed right into the junior year at University Park. They align curriculum to allow them to do that. They do it especially in engineering. They have to guarantee that students at those smaller campuses get the first 2 years of the engineering curriculum that absolutely matches up with University Park. They can't bring someone to that campus and then it turns out that their statics or dynamics course didn't cover the right material. There are other university systems that are tiered. South Carolina, their flagship campus is #1. The president of that institution is the president of the whole thing. The other presidents report to that person, but they've got 4 other campuses with chancellors, and then they've got even smaller campuses that have essentially deans, executive deans that run the campus. But everything operating and ultimately answering to the president of the flagship. In that case, you've got a little more differentiation. They don't have a single accreditation. And I'm saying all of this because the reality is the country is full of a lot of different systems. And until there's a little bit more concrete, information or at least discussion from the chancellor, we don't quite know exactly where this is aimed. I know that we'll be pressing certainly to have, we need to maintain the strength of this campus. We need to maintain its preeminence in terms of its research mission across the state, public service, but we are going to have to partner up in our academically somehow, and we're working on that. And Jeff can talk about that. I mean, we've already done some of that already.
Yeah, so with respect to the thing, one of the pieces you asked, which is our academic program, and the greatest concern of how will this work, will be more difficult, or we will produce something better. And I'll give you kind of 2 answers. The first answer I can say definitively, which is I don't know. The second answer is a little longer, but I think there are potentially positive things. One of the so as you know, we've created this process, academic program review and integration process, the purpose of which is to try to grapple with the kinds of questions within specific areas how do we align academic programs that serve three goals: make it easier for students to access, improve the quality of all programs, and that kind of goes to your weak link thing, that the idea would be the weaker links would be less weak through collaboration, and reduce cost. So we recognize and know, and President Hunter in a former job was a very strong advocate of this and continues to be, that if we're going to talk about academic programs, that we have to bring the faculty into the room. And so that's was the idea behind creating this APRA process with these teams that you've heard about. So we have teams working in 9 areas. At the end of this month, those teams will give us reports. And I suspect that those 9 reports are going to look very differently. But that is when the work of trying to figure this out, or some of the work of trying to figure this out, is going to take place. One model that might make great sense for engineering, maybe move the way we want to move, and then maybe a very different model for nursing or for business. So we have to look at those areas, and we want the people who have the knowledge about their curriculum to have a voice in this. My concern, of course, is that things are changing rapidly. We just showed you rapid changes that the Board of Trustees has made, and really have been not informed by those conversations about program. And that, I think, is one of our biggest challenges, that there is an urgency to move forward that's legitimate, it's real because of our financial challenges. And then it's balancing that against the time it takes to be thoughtful and to bring the right people into the into the conversation. When I'm feeling good, my optimistic hope is that these 9 reports are really substantive in that we can take those to the presidents and the Board of Trustees to start to say, in Maine, these are the kinds of things that will make sense in terms of academic programs, and hopefully that will inform the implementation of this one university model. I think you all agree, has been primarily driven from a budget discussion, and less so from what does it mean for academic programs. I think the reports we get from the APRA are the opportunity for that to be more of the conversation, and as we launch the next wave of teams looking at academic programs, hopefully bring more information to bear on them. You're in charge.
I'm not very good as a talk show host, though. Danny.
First of all, thank you for the presentation again. Very informative. As I listen to the issues put forward, ostensibly this is a political process, and the key component, one of the key components in any political process is advocacy. So my question is, A, who's advocating for us? And B, when it comes time, will you be reaching into the rank and file to advocate? I'm not talking about picketing in the streets necessarily, but we've seen that as an effective, that is a tool that has been used. So at some point, will we be asked to advocate sort of in a more public way? So who's on our side right now, and when, if we get the call, will we be asked to do something?
Yes, I think the answer is yes. I'll let you comment on legislative advocacy. Certainly, frankly, this evening's dinner with the Board of Visitors is a really strong advocacy effort. We do have a meeting with the board every summer, and quite often, we have, I'd say, modest turnout. They are really coming. Our Board of Visitors comes from some distance, and many of them are out of state, and we are having a very high turnout tonight, specifically so they could have this conversation with the chancellor and the board chair and vice chair. We certainly have conversations with donors. We have conversations with the advisory boards, and we haven't exactly fired off the gun and lit our hair on fire because, and I have to admit, it's a fine line you walk between being so strongly an advocate that people tune out. So we certainly have to work with the system, and we certainly don't want our advocacy to cause us to have problems, frankly, getting the budget through in Augusta, which we truly needed. And I think that's a piece of how we're trying to work forward with a strong message, but a message of partnership and collaboration. Because if we didn't get the the $20 million that's in the budget, we would be in a lot worse shape. And do you want to comment? I mean, that's just a piece of how we have to manage our effort. And I'm sure there are times when people wish I would do more or less or lean one way or the other, and it's just sort of a balancing act, and I'll just admit it.
The only thing I'll say again is, we're not calling on you yet, but keep your pitchfork sharp.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everybody should be ready. How's that? Dan?
I have a big set of love. Dan Harrison, here in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Conservation Biology.
People up front are
Okay. For those of us who have been on campus for many years, we used to count on a general budget formula where we would see about 50% of the state appropriations coming to the University of Maine, and if there were bad times, we could count on incurring about 50% of the cost of a cut. I'm interested in how that formula may have shifted over the past couple of years, and then what are going to be the factors at play in terms of shaping that formula as we move to this one university concept. Thank you.
Actually, I'll give it to Brian.
So the formula has shifted, for sure, for a couple of pieces. The biggest one is outcomes-based funding. As you suggested, the traditional, it's not a funding formula. It was really this is the percentage of the appropriation you were receiving in 1968, and we'll call it a formula. But we were about 50% of that. USM was 25%, and the other campuses, give or take, were about 5%. Outcomes-based funding formula went into effect 3 years ago. It's a 6-year ramp up, 5% each year. We're at 15% for FY16. So far, that has shifted the two campuses. There's two campuses that lose resources in that allocation. This campus and Machias. Machias is not going to do well in any formula. The biggest winners in that formula are USM and UMA. They do very well in the outcomes-based funding formula. Farmington does fairly well as well. That's shifted about $2 million from this campus. Most of it, again, has gone to UMA and to UMF. On top of that, the system has changed the way the system is now funded off the top of the appropriation. I think overall we're at about 44% roughly now. I would expect, setting aside the unified budget and a single revenue stream, because that may blow up outcomes-based funding. But absent that, it feels like we're moving towards a roughly 40-30 split between UMaine, USM, and then the others are, splitting that remaining percentage. Feels like, if we weren't moving away from, we'll see how outcomes-based funding works in this new model. If we're keeping it in place, I think I'll certainly be arguing that at a time, I think the formula, moving in that direction, there were trustees that wanted to go there, maybe it made sense. I think the formula needs to be tweaked though. I'd suggest that, a 40-30 split at a time when USM is losing 20% of its enrollment and we're growing, that would cause me a lot of alarm, thinking what happens if they get their act together, and we all hope they do, and they get their enrollment back up, we flatten out. I mean, it feels like we'd end up with about a 38-38 split, and that's not right either. So if the formula is going to stay, and again, we'll figure that out over the next few months as we think about how we're going to implement this unified budget. If it stays, then we'll certainly be advocating for some significant changes to that formula.
Jonna?
Looking at the charts, and what I've heard when we brought these things up is, don't worry, there's a dotted line. What does a dotted, and I mean this seriously, has there been any definition of what a dotted line means?
No. And it's also I've been assured that it's not just a dotted line, it's a strong dotted line. And of course, at that moment, I just said, oh, well, I'm fine then. I don't know, and I can't explain it anymore. I really don't know. Michael?
Just a quick question. With finances and personnel being rolled toward the system.
Then you have to speak so that they can
outlined-
hear you.
Okay. With finances and personnel being rolled into the system and the issue of program alignment and everything else, are we going to see a usurpation of how can we replace faculty, how we grow faculty, or anything else? Where will that decision-making ultimately lie? It used to lie in the departments, then it went to the colleges, then it went to the provosts. Is it continuing to ascend?
Well, we keep being assured that every little decision will not have to go to the system. And so I'm going to, I mean, I think that we will, I'm trying to be really fair about this. I think we will operate within certain parameters that will be given a budget to manage. At the worst case scenario is I won't have the authority that I think I should have, but it's not that every dime that we spend, we have to get permission from somebody else. I think we will have a budget to execute and manage within, and exceptions to that, we will probably have to go forward and get permission for.
I could say something.
Yeah.
I think one of the key questions is about faculty alignment questions. I'm also very concerned about your question, and will that be the way things are? What I've been told, what we actually operated this year, was that any faculty line that we wanted to put in or replace at the University of Maine, I had to agree at least to first engage in a discussion with the chief academic officers at the other campuses for two reasons. One, is there a way that we could share resources? That is, what one faculty hire could serve multiple campuses, and this is in the effort of taking a concrete step toward collaboration. And two, given that we were aware that there were going to be some retrenchment of faculty at some campuses, would we have the opportunity in positions that we wanted that could be replaced by retrenched faculty? So that was the rationale for it. We had several of those discussions with the chief academic officers. There was actually some discussion about sharing at other campuses. The way our positions, it was never an issue, but I did have to go through and have that discussion with them. And I was told, we did have sort of parameters and authority. However, in practice, I did have to wait until our discussion was reviewed with the chancellor before giving the final okay, which felt an awful lot like approval. So we're pushing back against that as we move with this one university implementation. But I think you raised a great question, Michael. It's creeping in that direction. Again, the defense of it is this, and the chancellor's been very open from the very time he was hired, that we need to move toward greater collaboration. And he wants the faculty hire, that collaboration to at least be a factor in discussion about faculty hires.
You mentioned the economy.
Yeah, we actually have our first shared position with cooperative extension. We have a position that's shared University of Maine faculty and University of Maine Presque Isle faculty, an agronomist. The University of Maine appointment is in cooperative extension, I think is it 25% or 20%?
We have 75, they have 25.
Yeah, 25% at University of Maine Presque Isle, 75% University of Maine. That's the first of its kind I'm aware of, and we'll
And
see
it's
how
up at
that
the research
develops.
farm in Presque Isle.
Yeah.
So the person will be located in Presque Isle. Yeah. Ed?
Ed Ashworth, NSFA. We'll begin preparing for the next budget year in September, which is quick and it keeps me awake at night. In the past, what we've done in the college I represent is we don't really budget for much for replacement equipment or for infrastructure improvements. We wait till the year is progressing and then we see what money we've saved through salaries and we invest it in those items. It looks like we'll be needing to plan for September what our infrastructure needs will be and our equipment replacement needs will be. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's going to be a planning process involved. I think there's going to be a couple of steps in this. I think one is to, one of the things that I think we really need to do if we're gonna live in this new world, and we're not going to be able to do it just for all of FY16, but to get a start, is to really get a good baseline for what is E&G base funding and what is carry forward. And we have a lot of places where we just spend them interchangeably. And so, one of the, I think if there's a positive, I think it will help us, again, it will help us get a better feel for what that is, what's the appropriate baseline. Because if we do truly move to a unified budget, where revenue comes in centrally, the way that almost every other system does this is that each campus has a true kind of baseline budget. This is your cost to continue operations if nothing else changed. And that's the first step you do in developing a system-wide budget is what's the baseline budget. My biggest concern about that is that we have a lot of places here that survive, that use carry forward as part of just your normal budget. And so that you have a baseline budget, a true baseline budget that is far lower than what your need is. And so my concern is we move to this unified budget. We have a bunch of units all over campus that have these baseline budgets that are too small, that we haven't adjusted, and will have difficulty surviving in this new world. So one of the things we want to do is rather than just I know this will be a little bit of a pain, but rather than just transfer those resources over, one, we can't do it because it would violate the board policy, but part of it too is having that paper trail, knowing that when someone's using carry forward, are they using it for what should really be operational needs, or is it really equipment replacement? And so again, we haven't figured out that process yet. It's been very slow, and it's just been difficult. I mean, we're just so different than the other campuses.
First, if you're having trouble sleeping already, that's probably good, because we're going to start actually in June this year to talk about not September. We're already analyzing enrollment trends, and the things we talked about that, mostly around hiring. But again, with my conversations with Ronnie, we've had many about this, and my own experiences as a dean and a department chair, and I know the way you've operated, you summarized it very well. And Ryan's point, we have inadequate operating, and so we are innovative, and we are thinking about ways to support things. The positive way to look at this kind of change is it is an opportunity for us to try to create operating budgets that make sense. And we've got some of the data, we look at the data on spending patterns, not how your budget was built, but how the budget was used. And those are the kind of data we'll be bringing into these kind of conversations. So we can, perhaps, if this is successful, get to meaningful budgets at the beginning of the year. Because again, for most of us, when I was again chair and dean, the budget was just a starting point, and then you just start moving things around and make things happen. We try to get the budget to be more reflective of our true needs.
Yeah, on this budget issue, this is Bill Davis, I'm chair of civil. To get down in the weeds a little, looking at civil engineering's budget, I'm a little worried about the carryover. So if I look at our E&G budget, I've got salaries and fringe, that's gone, that's not carried over. In terms of actual E&G money coming to our department, it's about $5,000 a year, which keeps phones and everything's office. The rest of it is program fee and curriculum. That's what we hire our TAs with, that's what we maintain our labs and our equipment. And so those fees are being paid by our students to take our classes and support our program. And I'm really concerned that that's going to be factored up. That just seems very, very unethical.
I missed the last part of what you said.
About the program fee and curriculum fee? Okay, so that money comes in to our department, it's paid by students as fees for taking our classes to support our academic mission. But it's part of our EEG budget. And if that money is going to get taken by the system, I have some real concerns with that.
Yeah.
Do they make these distinctions?
Well, that's part of our job is to make those distinctions for the campus. And so, again, as we've looked at what other system, that's not a unique, as I've looked at, we reached out to some of our national resources and have looked at, as systems have moved to integrate budgets, as they move to single revenue streams, what have they done for things like, course fees is one that, again, has also been segregated in some other systems. They stay they stay in the programs where students pay those. So those are things that we have on our list that we'll bring to the table and make sure the system is aware of. But you know, those kind of examples, that's one we have on our list, but things like that, you know, are very helpful as we start these conversations, because, you know, we've got our giant list. Other folks, you know, as I half jokingly have said, you know, I could have complied with this policy when I was at Farmington, you know, by lunch. You know, because again, a lot of it was already centralized. You know, just much more complex here. Even if you know, forgetting the scale here, just the policy is just vastly different than what we have in place right now. So, absolutely, you know, appreciate the concern, and certainly something we'll be looking to accommodate.
We have 5 minutes, so, John.
I just wanted to say thank you for accepting an extension for your appointment, because you've got a really tough job. God knows if you didn't do it, I don't know if we'd find somebody who would.
Well, my motto is you couldn't make this stuff up. It's been that way for years, but I'm really clinging to it. But thank you. It is a tremendous honor and a privilege to be the president of this university. And I couldn't have imagined that my career would end up this way when I moved here. And I have just thoroughly loved working at this university with everybody on this campus. And that's why I like to be here. That's why I want to stay here. That's why I want my career to end here. So, thank you. Any other questions? Everybody hot enough and want to leave this room? I'm with you. Thank you.